Victorian Government acknowledges the Bunurong people as the traditional owners of the lands we've recorded on today. When we speak about coping with natural disasters, land management and resilience, there is no greater example than that set by the world's oldest living culture. I'm your host, Jarvis Holt, and this is Road to Resilience, the podcast where we unpack the journey to recovery after emergencies and disasters.
Well, do you want to start off?
Well, of course, the water was coming up near our house and we thought it wouldn't come in, but when we went down the kitchen and had a look, there was water coming under the fridge. I threw a towel down and then I looked up the passage and here it is coming through the floorboards. And so my daughter said, "Get out of here." And I said, "No, I can't. I'll panic." So I laid on the bed and watched it rise up over the skirting boards and over the windowsill. So it was about 6 inches high. I'm Cheryl White from Seymour.
I'm her husband, Mick White from Seymour.
This is Cheryl and Mick White. Cheryl and Mick White have lived in Seymour for decades. They experienced the 2022 floods and most recently those in January of 2024.
In 1974, before we built the house, the water came over the block. And I said, we won't build, once we saw how high the water came that time, I want to come up higher. And this time it come 4 inches higher than what it peaked back in 74. It's on the fence across the road there. You'll be able to see a black line along the fence. Well, that's the last flood.
It won't prepare us. No way.
You'll never get prepared.
No way.
For people affected by disasters, recovery isn't always linear. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about coping with stress and the range of other emotions that people experience on their way to building resilience. I'll be speaking to psychologists Michelle Roberts and Taimur Hussain. I'll throw over to you, Michelle.
So hi, I'm Michelle Roberts. I'm a psychologist and I've worked in and around the field of disasters for 41 years now, I think, a very long time, and happy to be here to share some of the learnings with people in the podcast today.
And also I've got sitting with us Taimur.
My name is Taimur Hussain. I'm very happy to be here today. So I'm a psychologist by training, and like Michelle, I've worked in the area of psychosocial recovery for not quite as long as Michelle, but for some time.
How would we gain the resilience in the face of, a climate where there are more and more emergencies that are taking place and they are compounding?
I think we use the term resilience without much thought behind it, and I think that when we're talking in the context of disasters and resilience, we're talking about what people can do for themselves and what others around them can do to help them to get their lives back on track in some way. And that doesn't mean necessarily the way it was before. It can be a new way of living your life, but that it's a good way of living life for you, that it's a functional way. If we think about kids in this circumstance, how can we help them to grow and thrive again after an experience like that? So it could be resilience, it could be resistance to all the hard things that the world can throw at us at times, but it's really about being the best you can in the way you interact with the world.
So how would we then develop that flexibility?
How we build that is by going down mental pathways of what if. If a flood was to come to us, what have we learnt from previous events? What do we know about our hazard or our risk here? And what do we need to do both physically and mentally to prepare ourselves for that? And you have a plan A, a plan B and a plan C. Doing that, I think, helps people to get ready for it in both the physical and the psychological sense, or to decide that they're not willing to tolerate the risk. And should they have the resources to make a choice to move away from the risk, and not every family does or every community, then, they say, well, actually, we're stuck here, we don't have the money to move, but we're going to make the best of it by doing this. Or they say, actually, I can't tolerate this. And we do see people, mainly after they've experienced a disaster, make the decision to move out of the area. If you get knocked over 10 times and you find you can't stand anymore, what are your options going to be and who can you reach out to? It's like walking into the ocean and getting knocked over by a wave and picking yourself up and then getting knocked over again and picking yourself up. And you can do it only so many times and then you become exhausted and you think that's enough and you walk out.
So when I think about knowledge, I think, there are kind of three key sources. We have research evidence, we have clinician or practitioner knowledge, but the third part, which is often devalued, but I think is most critical, is the knowledge and the experience of the people who have actually lived through these compounding disasters. There are communities in other parts of the world that are living and have lived with multiple disasters over generations. So I think we've got a lot to learn from the international context in terms of how these communities have continued to provide a sense of meaning and connection for the people in their communities, despite being impacted by these sort of compounding disasters.
So what, I guess, would be your guidance for people who are living in areas that are of higher risk for disasters?
I'm very sensitive to giving advice to people who have a lived experience of this because, I want to prioritise the importance of listening to, what are the things that they have done that have worked, what has enabled them to maintain grounding and connection to themselves, but to be there to support the grounding and connection to the people that are dear to them. So those things are very powerful protective factors. And so I think what communities that are in these situations require is an awareness of those protective factors that they already possess. Those things that are imbued within their life, within their family life, within their community life, that give them connection and meaning are the most powerful protective factors to create resilience for those individuals, families and communities in a disaster context. So I think, what I would advise is to tune in and to create an awareness of what those things are and to cherish them and to hold them close to you and to understand that these things play a very important role in your mental health. I'll give you an example. So my background is Middle Eastern and I'm Muslim, and there are some rituals within the Islamic faith that bring people in connection to themselves that are very grounding. So, for example, if someone identifies as a practicing Muslim, there's a washing process people do before prayer. So people might see something as that as just a means to an end. I've got to do the washing process before my prayer, but it's actually very mindful and grounding. So they wash their hands 3 times very carefully, the right hand, and then the left hand, they rinse their mouth. So those sorts of practices are very powerful in grounding someone in the moment, connecting them to their body and their inner world.
So that makes me think of the value of ritual. And if you don't have rituals embedded as part of your everyday thing, we know how useful it is to create routine. But I don't mean routine in the way we often use it. It's more about predictability.
Yeah.
And knowing a predictable process, likely outcome is reassuring. You spoke in terms of a role of reminding people around what's worked for them before. Does it apply here? Will it be helpful in this situation? And I think such simple words but so powerful in helping people is to acknowledge what's happened, acknowledge how it's making them think and feel, acknowledge what they've done before when they've felt like that and see if it works for them this time round, and to validate that they can do something for themselves in this circumstance and for those around them. So simple acknowledgement and validation is a way of getting people back in touch with their inner world, what's worked for them before, what are the predictable things that they can call upon that make them feel a measure of control is coming back to their own lives and themselves and how their thoughts are going. And I was thinking about a podcast that I was hosting, and one of the young women that we were interviewing spoke about growing up on a farm in East Gippsland, and that at a particular time every year her family said this is the week of getting ready for the fires. And they, as a family, routinely did the gutters, cleaned around, raked up the bark, made sure there was a water supply, checked the generator, talked about where the fires had come last time and where they'd moved the animals and all of that, so that they all mentally rehearsed the what-ifs. They had a shared plan. So when the 2009 fires were in their area, when the 2019-2020 fires were in their area, she said in reflection, I wasn't as affected as everyone else by this because we'd practiced it every year. We'd done it and I knew what I had to do. And then when we decided we'd done everything we could do, we left. And I went and I watched, knowing the fire was going to come to our farm, but I knew we had done everything we could.
It's a powerful story.
And she was in such a good place as a consequence.
Yeah.
When I watched the water come up over the windowsill and up over the legs of the dressing table, and I just laid there and I closed my eyes and opened them again, and I've seen it receding. I thought, oh, thank goodness for that. I've seen it going down.
The day after, as the water started to go down, people come from everywhere. We had the gas people come and made sure all the gas was turned off. We had the electricity people come and turned up all the local tradespeople and that.
They moved the furniture out.
They took
it to the tip.
Moved it out onto the major strip, and they had the trucks coming past, loading all the stuff for the tip and that. It was just everybody that just all amalgamated together, and it's amazing that how they did get together in that particular sense.
We were out of our home for 15 months. And you're going to ask me, how did I cope living away from home? I pretended I was in my own bed, and I went to bed and read a book, and I was all right. So it was lovely to come back.
And we're still getting everything together, but good things come to those who wait.
I won't be able to handle another one. No. Couldn't go through having a nice house like this now and getting all that wrecked again.
Now that we have been flooded, I mean, we've come close earlier in the piece.
I had panic attacks after it. Absolutely horrible. I know how to breathe now to do that. You got to do that. That'll get you out of your panic attacks now. The technique of that breathing has actually helped. And it helped you along to know people cared, And if you want to, you can go and talk to them. They'll help you through it.
For everyday people, resilience is a learned skill. Coping with stress comes in a variety of forms. For Cheryl, it looks like taking a step back and taking a deep breath in. For Cheryl and Mick White, finding hope after the flood has been a journey. Every day brings them a little closer to that goal. When we're experiencing an environment where, disasters are often out of our control, do you have some practical advice for people who want to gain that control? Like, what does that actually look like in terms of developing a ritual? What can the people listening actually do when they finish listening to us talk today?
Yeah, so I think it's important just to recognise that when we are in circumstances that are out of control, that there will be a very natural human reaction. Control and predictability is a very basic human need, and in these types of disaster scenarios, that very basic human need will be lost. And that as a result, you're likely to feel quite overwhelmed, quite threatened, and there might be an impulse of some to recreate that control. And what can happen in a family context, when one family member seeks to do that, it can impact other family members. And so it's important to create some sort of mutual empathy, empathy for the person who might find themselves in that situation, that what you're doing is a very natural reaction to an abnormal situation. There's nothing wrong with you. This is your mind and your body doing its best to cope in this situation, but also empathy in the rest of the family members to understand that that person, although their behaviour might be very confronting, might be very challenging, that they are having a very normal human reaction to a very abnormal circumstance, and how there can be sort of mutual empathy within that family system to each other when different people react in different ways. So I think the first step is understanding, and then the next step is to work with people to understand how can you recreate a sense of control and predictability in a way that makes managing these circumstances much more tolerable. I think you were going to say something.
I was just thinking about, there are people who thrive on control and people who find it terrible. And,
Yes.
you can have all of those permeations within a family group or a community.
Yeah.
One person's control can be another person's, I can't get myself organised because you're so busy organising us. And so I liked when you spoke about, empathy, mutual empathy, but more practical in a family, I think, is remembering, how do you operate the best, and there will be understanding within family, mostly, not always, but of, this is the person who gets up in the morning and puts the kettle on. That's their start to their day. This is the person who likes to lay in bed and read until I have to go and grab them, pull them out of bed, And so even just sort of having one shared thing that you're going to do as a family or within community or for yourself is the start to bringing back some predictability to your world.
So we've talked a little bit about, people often do recognise that they're struggling after a disaster, but what are some of the kind of warning signs that we can look out for our friends and family who might be struggling following a disaster?
From a physiological perspective, some of the warning signs might be you might find yourself in a state of fight or flight, and it might be very hard to come down from that. You might find it very challenging to focus or concentrate for periods of time, and that might get in the way of your ability to be present in relationships, to engage in study and in employment. From a behavioural perspective, you might find yourself drinking excessively. You might find yourself quick to anger and irritation, and that might manifest as a form of aggression that can be directed to people that are close to you, but could also be directed to other members of the community. So while they are the warning signs, it's important, again, to show that empathy and kindness to yourself, recognizing that this is your mind and your body's way of attempting to cope with a very abnormal situation. And in of itself, there's nothing wrong with those reactions. They become problematic when we become fixed in them, and they begin to affect how we want to be in the world, when they begin to affect our relationships with the people we care about and our ability to engage in our communities. When that becomes a problem and we find it difficult to exercise flexibility, to have other types of responses, then perhaps it's time to chat to your GP or another healthcare professional.
Timer, I also want to add in that often children experience their distress after something like a disaster more in their bodies.
Yeah.
And they have aches and pains, tummy aches, headaches, and it's a way of them conveying, their body's conveying the distress that they're feeling. Yeah. So we need to be attuned to that as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Even for adults, it can manifest in those ways. I worked with someone who, following a sort of significant traumatic event, spoke about an experience of their blood being on fire, and the GP ran various tests. They all came up negative, sent them to various specialists. Again, they all came back negative. I began working with this person, and over a course of about 3 to 6 months, we began to understand that this person was holding a tremendous amount of guilt around the decision they made during a traumatic incident, a disaster that had adversely impacted a family member. And it was really interesting because how do we often describe family? As your blood. I think it's a really important point to emphasize that children will often experience it, within their bodies, and at times adults can also experience the impacts of these traumatic events in their bodies as well.
And I think after a disastrous event, we are hopefully a little bit more attuned that there will be changes in behaviour that are normal and adaptive responses to the change of circumstance. But I think that for me, behavioural signs that there's a concern, so I would call them behaviours of concern, are when really there are behaviours that aren't really in the best interests of the person. They're not making choices that are good for them, and that they feel a pain, a physical pain, a mental pain, I'm out of whack, I can't fit back into this community. You know, that causes a real discomfort inside, that sort of I've done something wrong, or I should have done this, or you know what, I'm so angry with the world now, I just don't want to be part of the world. And so it's really observing, one, the changes, two, the concerning behaviours or the behaviours of concern, and three, checking in with that person and voicing your concern. I see that you're doing this and I'm worried for you. Is everything okay? You know, and then they can say, I just decided I was going to change my life, you know, and or whatever. Or they can say, really, am I doing that? Oh, I guess I'm just really cross about this. So what do you think?
I think with some of the men that I've worked with, they may, or they've spoken about noticing some of their friends socially withdrawing, and that can be a difficult thing in sort of my experience for sometimes men to manage. So the default might be to give them space. So they're withdrawing. They're not coming out with us as often. They're not participating in community sport with us as much anymore. And at least in my experience, and certainly not speaking for all of men, I think we can struggle to know how to respond to that situation, and the default might be to lean away as opposed to leaning in. And so I think in those circumstances, ideally what we need to develop is a way to lean in when we perhaps notice or sense that an important person in our lives is beginning to struggle and withdraw. And that leaning in might require you to do something that's not really in the pattern of your friendship circle. You know, you might need to reach out to that person in a way you haven't had to reach out to them before. You might need to have a conversation about how they're going, which you haven't had to do before. So those things are really important in terms of just giving yourself permission to lean in when you see a friend or someone important in your life beginning to withdraw.
You know, we were talking about the after the event and making sense of it. I think reminding people of the decisions they made and the context that they were made in, and what were the great decisions they made. I think we need to come back and say, and what did you do that was helpful for yourself, for others, for safety? We need to have a sense of agency, that we had opportunities to make choices and they were choices based on what we were seeing at the time. And I think it makes me feel good if I think I made good decisions in the heat of the moment, or if they were decisions that in hindsight I thought, maybe that wasn't the best option. But look what was going on at that time. You know, with the information I had, that was a good decision.
I think it's important to maintain a degree of kindness to yourself, that you're confronted with a circumstance that you don't have a cognitive schema or internal working model that can very clearly direct you to what to do. So in that moment, you might do something that ruptures, your relationship with your partner, or, with your child, or with your parent, or you do something that's not reflective of your value system or the sort of person you want to be in the context of your family, in the context of your community. I think in that moment, it's very important to be kind to yourself, to have empathy to yourself, to recognize that you don't have an established cognitive scheme or internal working model that can clearly direct you to what you need to do in a way that's reflective of your values and the person you want to be.
So I've never been in this situation before in my life. I made the best decisions I could.
Yeah.
That's okay. I did the best I could. That's being kind to myself around that circumstance, is to be understanding. And if you're understanding of yourself and you did the best you could, you're more likely to be understanding of the other people around you too.
And so that process of, being kind to yourself, understanding you're making decisions in that particular context, if they do adversely impact upon yourself or someone else, being able to engage in a repair process where you're able to build a self and collective understanding of what you might do differently the next time. That's the resilience, because that's the preparation. So if it happens again, we have a common consciousness that, maybe we have I have a default to react in this way, but I've learnt the next time to react in a different way.
But you have to acknowledge, I think, that the ability to think in a logical way after such a catastrophic experience is not like it had been when you and I are just sitting here shooting the breeze about our work.
Yeah.
And that your thinking is often scattered all over the place. You can't actually think as logically as you'd like to. And so that building that narrative of what did I do and what was good and what would I do differently happens over time.
Oh, definitely.
And that, you may not be able to even look within or in the mirror for a long time because you don't like what you see. You also don't like how it makes you feel again.
Absolutely.
And so we're very good at saying, not looking at that bright light yet. That's too much. I can't do that soul searching yet. Or I feel incredibly guilty that I've done this and I should have done that. I'm just going to avoid that and tippy-toe around it for a while. And so the benefit of then connecting with other people is someone else will say to you, you know what, I made the worst decision that day. If I had my time over, I would have done it this way. And you inside you think, that's me too.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're talking about it. So it helps you to start to do the hard work of thinking about why didn't I or should I have had, or I did this and that was good but I should have done that, or whatever, in a way that you don't judge yourself harshly. It's not going to happen or generally it doesn't happen within the first 24 hours anyway, because you're still so heightened and still go, go, go mode. But over time, a little dipping your toe in the water and thinking about it's a good thing.
For people who are avoiding and can't look in the mirror or aren't willing to kind of address the things that are making them feel bad, how do we improve? Pick up the speed.
I think again, it's important to recognise that is an important component of someone's recovery. So their ability to exercise some control over their thoughts and emotions means that they may choose to avoid that content for some time. And that's okay. That's totally okay. And as professionals, we need to be respectful of that. And again, it goes back to showing empathy and kindness to oneself, that recognizing that, now might not be the right time because you need to show up for yourself. You need to show up for your family, you need to show up for community. And that might mean now's not a good time to go there. If it becomes a bit more chronic and there's impacts in your relationships because of it, you might need the support of someone else to hold a process that allows you to go there in a way that's safe. And so we can't make people recover to our timeline. It's just the reality that we all have our own times around this. And, the current literature talks around 3 or 4 known trajectories of recovery. There's the people who fall in a bit of a dip and are really despondent and have forgotten how they're coping, and you worry for their health and their well-being. And then it's like they pick up their bundle and think, oh, well, this is where it is now, let's get on with it. There's people who are really spectacular and I'm all good and I've got this and I know what we're doing and we're going to be fine, until about 6 months later where they think, actually, I'm really sick of this, I'm tired, I don't know what I'm doing here, and they drop their bundle and say, too hard, basket. And so that's when they need the additional dose of support to help pick up the bundle again and move on. So you might be a friend and you'll say, I'll walk alongside you with this bundle for a while and chat with you about it, and when you're ready to take it back, I'll give it to you.
Well, I hope that all people listening are feeling reassured, as I do, that the road to recovery after a disaster is possible. It can take some time and it might be a challenging journey, but we need to rely on our friends, our community, our family, and sometimes a professional to find our way there. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been excellent to hear from you both.
Thank you.
We hope that you've been able to take away some key tips and tools to cope with stress in the wake of disaster. Remember to reach out to your local GP, or if you or a loved one needs immediate support, call Lifeline on 13 11 14.